Well, this is going to be interesting. Discussing languages as related to TTRPGs and using real-world examples because I like studying real-world languages. It's fun. Alright, starters. What to do with languages? Well, one thing that is very common in fiction and real life is to have things written on walls. This particular stone slab here is a piece of an actual building that was carved with glagolitic. Glagolitic was a form of writing used in Eastern Europe during, well, quite a long period of time. And its use didn't stop until relatively recently, which means that glagolitic is not only relatively easy to get translations for, but there's a Unicode page for it so that you can have copy-pastable text using the writing system. Oh yeah, that's cool. I mean, this is, however, is a great example of something akin to the way in, for example, Lord of the Rings. You have a group of people walk into a building. They see an inscription on the wall in Elvish or Dwarvish. And not everyone knows the language, but, it's easy to find someone who knows how to read it. And moving on. Here is an example that is a case of the stereotypical mystery language. One that no one, anywhere, knows how to read. This is from what is known as the Indus Valley Civilization. In the desert, well, what is today a desert, that is west of India. In obviously the Indus Valley, which at one point in time used to be fertile and lush, and a place that was great for raising cattle and livestock and growing crops. Then the climate changed, the terrain dried out, and they weren't able to live there anymore. No one knows where they went. No, seriously. And there is no method anyone has ever been able to find to figure out what any of this stuff says. These were ceramic tablets that they created for some reason. We don't know what. And also, this isn't a alphabet. Look at how many characters they have. I did math, and this is over 300. Yeah, that's not an alphabet. What is it? Don't know. But this is obviously, written text encoding information of some kind. I don't know how to read it. But this is like the stereotypical thing where, you're exploring some ruins from a long dead race, and you're like, what's this? We don't know what any of this says. Which, you might be able to use for like a puzzle or something, even if no one actually knows how to read it. Or I suppose in some games you have like magical means to force yourself to learn a language. But whatever. It's a great example of we see this, we wish we knew what it was, but we don't. And next up, Elamite. Now, who are the Elamites? The Elamites were a civilization in the real world that was in the Middle East region. They were not Akkadians, not Babylonians, not Sumerians, not Persians, not Arabs, but they lived next door to them. And eventually, though, the Elamites were no longer a force to be reckoned with, and their population got absorbed into the surrounding nations, and the Elamites faded from history. I mean, they have living descendants, and people are trying to figure out what this stuff says, but apparently no one actually uses the language in daily life anymore. But there are thousands of texts written by the Elamites. Most crucially, though, is that see this one here. This is Elamite cuneiform. The Elamites, Akkadians, Sumerians, and Persians used cuneiform in a similar enough way that people can kind of sort of figure out Elamite cuneiform and think they actually know what it means. This stuff, though, this ain't cuneiform. This is what's referred to as linear Elamite because we don't actually have a proper name for it. And I found this somewhere that people think might be a way of transliterating it, but I genuinely not sure if this is actually correct. However, though, linear Elamite, it's one of those things where it's a different writing system for a spoken language that is otherwise well understood. Because Elamite wasn't in ancient times a rare language. It became a rare language over 1,000 years ago, but it's believed to have not actually fully died out until a few hundred years ago. And of course on the right we have an example of Akkadian cuneiform. Akkadian cuneiform, and also Elamite cuneiform, and quite frankly every major group that actually used cuneiform would write it in clay tablets, fire the clay tablets so that they could hand them off to someone else. And often these clay tablets would just get left in piles and for archaeologists to find years later. Why? Well, it was a form of permanent record keeping. You know, someone who is a bookkeeper might write down and record, like, okay, this is the number of crops that were harvested today. This is the total value of the cattle that were sold at market. All sorts of boring, pedantic record keeping that is of interest to someone, probably. Mostly boring, though. Obviously, that's not the only thing it was used to write, but it was one of those languages that was used for many, many very everyday, ordinary purposes. A lot. One source I saw claims that there are 10,000 known text samples of Elamite cuneiform alone. That doesn't count Sumerian, Persian, Babylonian, or Akkadian, just Elamite. Yeah, that's a lot. But that's an interesting thing that you will actually see in several places in real life and could see in a fictional setting too. It's like, oh, we have this Elvish settlement where, oh, here's the regular Elvish writing it. Oh, wait, what's this? What's this other script that they're using over here? Ooh. And then you realize that it's some secret ancient script used by the High Elves to write things because the High Elves don't actually want anyone else to know what they're writing. And, but, I mean, like, for example, China. China has always had more than one language in terms of written language. What people usually think of as Chinese is, well, the original Chinese language is actually believed to have been what is nowadays known as Manchu. And Manchu looks completely different from everyday Chinese. Even if it's the same spoken language, it's not the same written language. And that's the same example as Elamite here, and that's something that you could put into a TTRPG. Is that here's a book with a completely different writing system that no one knows what is, and then you find out that it's actually the same spoken language that people know. It's just a different form of writing that's perhaps intentionally used to deceive people and confuse people, or maybe it's just something that's older. Because one of the questions about Elamite is, why do they have linear? Because, a lot of cultures used variations of cuneiform, a lot in that region. This was unique to the Elamites. Although there have been other ancient text samples found that are vaguely similar in other parts of the world, but not the same as this one. One idea, perhaps, this is what the Elamites used to use before they started trading with their neighbors who used cuneiform. And then the Elamites started adapting cuneiform for their own uses for whatever. In a fictional setting, that kind of works because, dwarves trading with elves use something vaguely similar to Elvish script when trading with elves because it's easy for trade purposes. And then there's this other script that the elves don't understand how to read. The dwarves do, though, and it's just the same wording, just written down differently. Oh, another example of that. The infamous Rosetta Stone, written in 3 different languages: Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic, and I forget the other one. Latin, maybe? I don't remember. But the thing with that one, though, is that 2 of the languages on the Rosetta Stone are actually the same spoken language, just different writing systems. Because Demotic was actually the old Egyptian language written using Greek letters. Hieroglyphs, completely different in terms of how you read them. But, again, like with linear Elamite and cuneiform Elamite, same spoken language. Alrighty then. Well, yes, like hidden texts in games or fictional settings in general that are just weird different languages, a lot of the time you'll actually see them as a cipher, realistically. Like in universe, it's a cipher, not just out of universe. Because of the fact that someone wanted to record information without letting others know. Linear Elamite, do you think the Akkadians knew how to read it? I'm sure some of them did. Not many, I would wager. Alrighty then. Well, I'm getting meandering, so I think I'll call it here. Anyway, though, in summary, there's several different things you can do with languages in TTRPGs. Hidden information is a great one. And just flavor, because quite frankly, stuff like this, it's easy to translate, therefore it's not cryptic. It's something that's, maybe not everyone knows how to read it, but enough people know how to read it that it's not a challenge to acquire the information from it. Maybe you have like 3 party members. One of them knows how to read this, and they just walk up to it. It's like, oh yeah, and this is what happened, and that is what happened, and don't step on the blue tiles. And then you're done. Of course, you have stuff like this, which, ancient mysteries we may never find answers to. Then you have stuff like this, which, quite frankly, it's esoteric. Hard to translate, but doable. And it looks very, very different from anything anyone uses in modern day. Why? Well, the writing method. The method which people wrote cuneiform was actually predicated on using clay tablets as the writing surface. And they would use styluses made from river reeds to make indentations in the surface of the clay. And I mean, for them, it was actually very practical, easy, convenient, everyday writing method because, clay tablets, easy to come by. Make them by the dozens, daily, cheap as heck. I mean, they would literally treat them, the way we would treat paper nowadays. It's like, all right, get out a notebook, time to write stuff down. Boom. And, the styluses they used were literally just carefully trimmed pieces of river reeds. So, again, cheap as heck. And yet, because of the fact that they had a habit of firing them, because clay is kind of squishy. you have to be very careful with it to avoid erasing the text accidentally, which, quite frankly, is something that they would probably do intentionally, because if you're using it as a notepad, you can just smush the clay flat and write something completely different on top of what used to be there. Easy to erase until you fire it. Then you fire it and it becomes something that people might find 3,000 years later, because fired clay doesn't deteriorate very quickly. Oh well. But yeah, it's like that's actually a really good example. It's like, break into an old records room in a language that people don't use often nowadays, and you know, many documents are here from a time long past. People who, well, their descendants are still around. People can kind of sort of figure out what they wrote, but it's not the way people write things today. Great stuff if you're doing exploration sort of things, and examining ancient buildings. And realistically, though, it's honestly more for flavor than anything else, because as a TTRPG player, realistically, you're not going to actually read Elamite text. You, the player, are not going to decode Akkadian cuneiform. Heck, even this. You can, even though you can copy paste this stuff, because it has a Unicode page, you're not going to actually do that at the table. I mean, a DM could, if you wanted to, make paper handouts with some sort of ciphertext on them, and tell one or two of the players how to decode it if he wanted to. But, I mean, you'd need a good reason to go to that amount of effort, and could be cool. Or not. I don't know. Depends on how you do it. Alrighty then. Well, I guess I'll talk to you guys later.